This is going to be a very practical how-to session. It's not going to be a lot of fluff. It's a panel session, and I don't know about you guys, but a lot of times when you go to a panel session, it's sort of like a interview back and forth thing. You just get a lot of fluffy human interest things. That's not what this is going to be. So each of us have about 9 minutes. And what we've decided ahead of time, we met several times before this session today, to really come up with some key points that we want to get across on what I believe is a fascinating topic called the art of the deal. The art of the deal. What this really means is that for all of us, we're entrepreneurs. We either are thinking about creating a company or we've already created a company, and we obviously want that company to be successful, right? What we're going to talk about here is how do you drive the art of the deal to help make all the hard work you're doing, designing products, building products, making sure that they're great user interfaces, that you're building the community in the right way, you're doing the right marketing, you're doing the right competitive analysis. How do you make sure that all that hard work actually pays off in the end? And between myself and we're going to have Danny and Julien and Guy, we're going to give you some of our own, I'll say, life experiences on how we made that happen. The fundamental premise of this talk today, for the next 35 minutes, is really on the fact that at the end of the day, the thing you want to care about most is the fact that your company is your product. Your company is your product. And when you're working with VCs and when you're going through the whole funding process and you're trying to decide what you want to be when you grow up, most of the advice you're going to get is that you want to dream big. You want to really understand who your customer is. You really want to understand where your products can go in the marketplace. You want to understand competition and so on. But they really want you to develop this huge, big dream that they can then fund across because they want you to be at the heart of a new $100 million or $200 million or $1 billion marketplace. That's their goal, is to make that happen. And that's all well and good, and you need to have good products, and you need to have a great team, and you need to understand your competitive positioning. But never, ever forget that at the end of the day, if you are successful, the thing that you're going to sell is your company. If you look at this slide I have up here, if you have a company that you're starting today, it's going to end up being one of 4 outcomes. These are really it. There aren't 5, there aren't 10, there's really 4 outcomes for a high-tech company. One of the outcomes, which is sadly the most common, is that it's going to fail, right? Obviously, we're not going to talk about that here. You're not going to fail. The next one, which isn't too typical in a tech business, but sometimes it happens, is you sort of work into a lifestyle business, meaning you're just kind of happy making whatever you make, you have good customers, you like what you do, you're really not interested in growing it tremendously or shrinking it, you just like what you do. We're not going to talk about that here either. What we're going to talk about is the other 2 outcomes of being successful. You're either going to have your company be bought by somebody, the art of the deal, or you're going to have your company go through the IPO market, which is just another way of saying that the public is buying part of your market. Even when you go out and raise money, even with convertible debt, all you're really doing is you're selling a portion of your company. So you want to remember that at all times, that as your company grows and you need money, or eventually your company is acquired by somebody, all that means is that someone is buying your company, and that's how you achieve the success that you've worked so hard for. And the art of the deal in this presentation is to give you some tips on that. The last thing I'll talk about before I pass it off to Danny, to talk a little bit about how you make some of the decisions on going forward and how you get the buzz around your product. The thing you want to look for is when somebody's either thinking of investing in your company, which again is just a way of buying a small percentage of your company. So it's still, they're buying your company. They might only be buying 10%. They're still buying your company. Whether you're buying it or they're buying the whole thing in an acquisition, these are the exciting stuff you need to make sure as the CEO, or if you're on the management team, you want to make sure you have in place. You want to make sure you have a great product. You have to have a great team. The team is oftentimes more important than the product you have. Then you have to have a great vision to make sure that buyer really believes in where you're taking the company. But one thing that I do with a lot of startups is I also make sure that you think about the less exciting stuff, the more boring areas. Make sure you have really good IP agreements with everybody on your team. Make sure you think about your cap table. Make sure you understand what your team is going to think as you raise money or as you have your company be acquired. All 6 of these things on this piece of paper are very, very important elements on what you need to do to be ready for the art of the deal. So now let me pass it off to Danny, who has a lot of experience on what it means to create buzz in your company. You're going to hear a lot of techniques. I don't know if one of them is this idea here. This sounds like something that Julien Smith might tell you about as far as offering coupons if they buy your company. But you might hear some other ideas as well. But let me pass it off to Danny now, and he can give you a little bit on his background as well.
Okay, well, I guess this kind of sums up my talk anyway, so I'll just... Oh, there we go. That's more like it. Isn't that better? So I'm going to talk a little bit about how you generate buzz for your startup and use it to, I think, push through for fundraising and also push through on acquisition. So just quickly about Speak, which is my startup. So we founded Speak about 2.5 years ago. We've raised almost $6 million. We just did a Series A round recently. Hundreds of thousands of users, millions of phone calls have been hosted on our platform, and we're at exponential growth for revenue at the moment. So here's some press that we got. We've pretty much been in every single publication, tech, mainstream, niche, you name it. And I think one of the major mistakes that startups make, and I even during my office hours yesterday kind of dealt with this, is people just assume, like, I'm going to start a startup, I'm going to go out there and get started. How do I get in TechCrunch? Or how do I get covered? Or how do I get press? And I think you have to think about press and think about buzz in general as a very strategic tool for getting leverage for yourself. So it's not, it could be useful for user acquisition, but I think what it's really useful for is in leverage. And leverage could mean driving a venture capitalist to invest in you or stop dragging their feet, a corp dev person at a potential acquirer, getting on potential acquirers' radars. These things are leverage. So know when you're doing press, am I doing this for customer acquisition, for leverage to drive a fundraise, to get acquired, or for some other reason, for recruiting, you name it, because there's very different strategies. So how did Speak use buzz and press? So first thing, press. We don't use PR firms. Sorry if anybody's from a PR firm in the audience, but I think as a founder, you're better than any PR firm you can use. I think reporters like to hear from you more than some PR firm person. I think you're best suited to speak for your company and represent your company to the press. I think also the important thing you have to think about before you go pitch the press, you've got to build relationships. So if you're going out and announcing something right now, you should already, weeks ago, have built relationships with every single reporter that could be interested in covering your story, so that when you go pitch them, they've already heard of you, they know who you are, and most importantly, they remember you. Because remember, these reporters get thousands of pitches, or hundreds of pitches every single day from people, mostly PR agents probably, who think their story is the most important, most interesting, and they're all probably kind of sound the same to the reporter, to be honest. So a couple things that I do, and I do PR myself still for Speak to this day. I'm not necessarily professionally trained in it. I just learned how to do it a few years ago, and we've done pretty good. So I built a Twitter list early on that I called something impressive, like badass tech reporters or something, because they'll see when you add them to it. And every time I saw somebody for TechCrunch or for mainstream or any of the niche publications write a story that I thought might be interesting later or maybe interested in Speak later, I put them on the list. And when I was home, at the end of the day, winding down, watching TV, I would just kind of read the feed on Twitter for that list. And I would look for things that were interesting. So if I saw, like for example, I saw Alexia from TechCrunch had a cold one time. She said she was sick. So I had a virtual admin send her a get well basket to the TechCrunch offices, which is public. The address is public. So she got a basket with like green tea, echinacea, and it said, "From your friends at Speak, get well soon." That was easy. It cost $25. And now the editor-in-chief of TechCrunch knows who we are and have covered us like 5 times. And I send them 2 sentences whenever we need to pitch them something, and we typically get it covered as long as it's interesting. Another thing is I send cake pops. It sounds kind of dumb. I had little cake pops made that had a Speak monkey on it. Our logo is a big monkey. At Halloween time, I would send cake pops with the Speak monkey head on it in a little bouquet to a dozen or so reporters that I didn't know yet, that I wanted to have relationships with because I might want to pitch them at some point. So for like $20 a reporter, I got all these new relationships that I could then pitch later, and it cost next to nothing. The other thing I think works too is when you're pitching, be different. You got to realize when people pitch, they're doing the same boilerplate, boring, email that they're copying and pasting to every single reporter, and those reporters get 100 of those a day, and they just ignore them. So we pitch typically in ways that are unique and creative and different. So recently we did a partnership with Tempo, the calendar app, and we pitched the press. We sent orange jumpsuits, like prison jumpsuits, to all the reporters. And Speak is a new way of doing conference calls, so we eliminate phone numbers and pins from a conference call. We do a link instead. So on the jumpsuits, there was an old conference call dial-in on the back, like an inmate number for prison. And in our pitch, it said, we're freeing people from conference call dial-ins. And we had a little handwritten note with our pitch on it for each reporter. And they were actually taking pictures of that. Like we had reporters like wearing orange prison jumpsuits with Speak on it, like posting pictures on Instagram. And then better yet, they actually took our pitch and covered us. So it doesn't take that much creativity and work to be interesting and just be unique. It's not that hard. But that goes such a long way. So here's what I'm most and least proud of. This is kind of Speak's coming out party a few years ago. So I was at South by Southwest doing the pitch contest there, and I actually won it. So I had a minute to pitch Speak to this huge audience, and I couldn't think of what to do. I wasn't supposed to be the one pitching. It was supposed to be my co-founder, and he left at the last minute to go do like dinner with the mayor or something. And my co-founder has no tattoos. He's not like me. So I get on stage and I pitch Speak for about 30 seconds, and then the last 30 seconds, I promise that my co-founder, who's not there, no tattoos, no idea what I'm doing, has agreed that if I win, he'll get his ass tattooed with the Speak monkey. And sure enough, I win. Wall Street Journal hears about it, lets us know that if we go get a picture of the ass tattoo in Austin the next day, they'll cover us. So needless to say, Speak's first major press coverage was my co-founder's ass in the Wall Street Journal. And that was huge. It turned into, we were in their top 25 like startups of the year documentary they did last year, and just became a really good source for us, all from an ass tattoo. And the last thing, I know you're all here, and I know Guy probably can speak more about this than I can, but pitch contests were actually a great way for us to generate buzz. We won a couple. We didn't win TechCrunch Disrupt. We won the other two. We won Tech Cocktail Celebrate. The other two were just good ones you should know about. But I think those are also great ways, especially for VCs and for potential corp dev people at acquirers. They pay attention to who wins these pitch contests. And it is a badge of honor and a sign of validation to win them. And it can really help immensely, especially with fundraising, I've found, to kind of push you over the edge if you win a contest. And a lot of companies launch at things like TechCrunch Disrupt and here. So last thing, just remember, investors, acquirers, they're human. So as much as everybody wants to be data-driven these days and look at numbers only, they can all be swayed, they can all be persuaded. Everyone gets impacted by press coverage and the perception of buzz, the perception of momentum behind your company and your team, and use those things. And when you're going to get press and going to get coverage, keep that in mind. Like that's, I think, the most powerful component of getting coverage and press. It's not always great for user acquisition. It's great for building leverage. So thank you.
Okay, I'll give you a quick impression of my background. You guys better be tweeting out that I have 2 microphones, because this is probably the most interesting part of the talk. Really quickly, I think what it basically is like 10 years of working on strong word-of-mouth projects of some kind. 3 best-selling books that have been on New York Times bestseller list, Wall Street Journal bestseller list. 2 companies, a lot of media, done a lot of different things. So I have an impression of what it is what kind of ideas spread. The most recent project I work on is a company called Breather, like take a breather. And essentially it's a network of rooms that you can unlock with your phone. So the reason, everything that I say, I'll say in the context of this, and just so you get an impression of what it is. Given our first round was 1.5, the second one, which was not disclosed, and then we're doing 10 cities in the next 12 months or 18 months or something like that. It's going really well. And really what you want to ask yourself around this idea of this talk is, why can you get a project off the ground? How does it become interesting versus not interesting? You have to be selling it to everyone all of the time, but of course the best thing that you can do is to make it interesting by itself. And a lot of people, I mean, you know, there's some value in getting ass tattoos, and there's some value in sending things to people, but the number one thing that I think that we focus on when we make projects, and I think across every project I've ever worked on, is just making something that's so fundamentally interesting that it is naturally discussed between people. And if you are making something and people don't talk about it, it could probably still be better. And just looking yourself straight in the mirror and saying, no, it's still not fucking good enough. And that's just reality. And I'm gonna, oh my God. Jason. Are you okay? Jesus. My talk was that good. So just to give a sense of context to what it is that we do, we fundamentally sell office space. That is what our company does. It's the most boring thing in the fucking universe, and yet by many people, it's been called an idea whose time has come. So it feels new, it feels fresh, it feels exciting, even though we're selling fucking office space. That's how boring it is. And so when you're thinking about your project and you're thinking about either raising money for investors or selling your company or whatever, you have to think not only how am I going to do outbound marketing, but how am I going to make it so fundamentally interesting that I can just do my work. I can just focus on my product. I don't have to do anything else but focus on my product. And when people come talk to me, then I'm going to reach out to them. We'll have a conversation. And as a consequence, like we received many, many newspaper articles from people we've never even heard of in countries we've never visited with languages we've never spoken. From Berlin to Shanghai to everywhere. And so you have to think about when you're doing a deal, one of the most important things is like you don't want the guy who you're selling to does not want to hear it from you. So of course you want to be doing a deal where someone has heard about you from someone else, hopefully who uses the product. And what we try to create is we try to create something exciting where they hear about it from someone else, they hear buzz, and they're not quite sure why they find it exciting. They don't know why. They've looked at the product. It's interesting to them, but they've heard about it from their friends. That's it. And if they've heard about it from their friends, it's fundamentally stronger than anything that you can ever talk about. So actually, the major thing is just work on your own thing and get it done and get it sticky. So talk about your idea like it's inevitable. Talk about it like it's the future. If your project truly is inevitable, then you're going to be able to find a way to talk about it and say, this is just what's happening. I'm not actually trying to sell you on anything. It's just the natural consequence of what the future looks like. So in our case, we talk about office space, the future of office space being like a series of networks, and talking about the unbundling of things and talking about how something that is going to happen regardless of whether it's done by us or not. And this is how you sell investors and this is how you sell companies, by saying it's not really about us, it's about a movement, it's about something bigger. We position our product around trends and patterns. So you're always looking around things like media and saying, okay, venture capitalists are talking about this idea. They're talking about, in this case, right this year, they're talking about unbundling. They're talking about Uber. They're talking about sharing economy. And you can find convincing ways to sell your product around those things, or hopefully actually build a product that really does benefit from genuine trends. So if you're able to do that, you really will benefit from a number of waves that are just heading in your direction. Never think of a company as being something that you're just doing and this is your idea and your idea is never going to change. If your idea is never willing to change, you have to be cognizant of the fact that you're probably wrong about it. You're probably wrong about the idea. You probably could shift it in a certain direction, change the name, change the way that you discuss it, change the slogan, change anything, and as a consequence, it will probably go faster. And really your job is just to make a product that goes as fast as possible. So be willing to do micro pivots everywhere that you go. Looking at trends, this is just an old graph. It's like point to investors and point to acquirers and say, this is what's happening already. Make something of it because of the fact that it's happening. This is what is happening this year. In 1 year, it's going to be bigger. In another year after that, it's going to be bigger still. So just really talking about your thing like it's happening already and just get on board. And the way that you truly create an exciting thing for investors or advisors, or really even for talent, is that you're casting a wide net. You're not just speaking to one investor, one acquirer. You're speaking to 2 or 3 at any given time to make sure that you have the ability to take deal A, deal B, or deal C and create competition, or as Danny would call it, leverage. It's the same thing. Never look at a deal as being something that's too good to be true. I have to have this one deal because it's almost never going to work out that way. One of the number one realities of deals is that they fall through. But at the end of the day, what really matters is that you have to work much less hard if your product is good. And they're going to look at your product, they're going to touch it and feel it like human beings. The way, our rooms this is what our app looks like. It's, we worked hard on it, and we have good people working on it. Our rooms are very nice, so then when people show up in the rooms, they feel really good. They tweet it out. They share it on Instagram. They fall off their chair fucking thinking about the room. Everything happens because of the fact that the product is naturally good. And really, at the end of the day, everything that you do comes from that. So I do believe in hustle. I do believe in working really hard and selling really hard for everything that you're doing, but fundamentally make sure that the core is naturally good. Your name, your team, and what you represent and why you do it, they're buying the reasons behind that. They're not just buying the ability, they can put the deal into 100 other things than what your company is. And really you want to be selling why you are the team to do it, why now is the time to do it, why this is the exact way that things should be done, why it's failed before. And at the end, that's really how you're going to end up getting the deal that you want. Anyway, thank you for your time. I think that's all I have to say. Cheers.
I didn't do slides. I have like a little note on hotel letterhead that I scribbled last night. Hopefully it's enough. Can you read this from here? So I want to talk about a few things. So for those who don't know me, my name is Guy. I was the CEO of Anavo. We were acquired last October by Facebook. Now I'm at Facebook, running product for internet.org, which is Facebook's mission to connect the rest of the world. I want to talk a bit about the last leg of that journey, which is basically three things I actually want to cover. How you engage your acquirer, how do you make the decision to sell or not to sell, and closing the deal. So let's talk about the first part. So a sentence I really like, I heard a while ago, this is from Terence Kawaja, who's at Luma Partners, is great companies are bought, not sold. That's a really, really good thing to think about. The reality is a lot of acquisitions end up happening not in a vacuum, not knocking on the door of like a corp dev person, but they're a result of a relationship. Because this is, like the other guy said, this is about humans. This is about building relationships over time. So a lot of the times, what will happen is you will have a relationship, a conversation, a partnership. It will vary with a big company with deeper pockets and an M&A team, and that will end up at some point potentially starting to take a new twist. What in our case, for example, we had a bunch of conversations with Facebook, and we wanted to work together on a lot of different things. But at some point, the business development guys on both sides, we just couldn't make it work. Like, how do you structure an agreement where we do this and you do that, and we do this together? And there was just no way to make it aligned. The only way to make it aligned is if we were actually the same company. That's the conclusion that you want to try to bring them to. Another thing to keep in mind is that as you're talking to big companies, doing deals, having conversations, acquisitions are always on their mind. I see this now when I'm on the other side. Every time we meet a small company, it's sitting in the back of your mind. Should we acquire them? Is this useful? Is this going to be valuable? Is there something that they can do that we can't? It's always there. So always keep that in mind as you're having the conversations. And look for the little signals. For example, if the corp dev guy comes to the room, that's a signal. Look for the little things that will say something is cooking. There is some interest that is starting to happen. And at some point, obviously, things will start to get real. In our case, I was invited to another meeting. Amin, who is head of M&A at Facebook, is there. All right, something's happening. Shit just got real. Second thing, how do you make a decision? There is no good answer for this, but it's ultimately a very, very personal choice. You have to understand, you have to really think deeply about what your goals are on a personal level. What are you trying to achieve with your company? Do you really want to grow? Do you want to take it to $100 billion company? Awesome, like, do it. But sometimes we get slightly carried away in our own kind of hyperbole, and we need to honestly look ourselves in the mirror and say, what do I want to achieve here? Is this the right time to start thinking about an acquisition? Is this the right time to kind of think about the next big step for your own personal life, and try to understand if that's something you're willing to do? Weigh the odds. Be very realistic about the risks. You have to be. This is the only way to try to make that thing. And obviously, there's just no one answer. We had an awesome year, an amazing year, the last year of Anavo. Things were going well. We could have continued on the trajectory, but it was just for a lot of reasons to do with ourselves, personally, what we wanted to do, the team, the opportunity. Facebook is an amazing acquirer, a great company to be at. We knew it was the right choice. And we knew that's something that we wanted to try to move forward with. One of the interesting things to keep in mind is that an exit is not the end of your journey. It's actually usually roughly halfway, because you spend a number of years building up your company, and then you more often than not spend a number of years working for your acquirer. So you better damn like your job, because this is your life. This is what you're going to wake up to for a long time. Would you be willing to take an offer that's 10% better but 50% more boring? Make that choice. Try to understand what you really want to do. These things matter. You need to really try to understand what's interesting to you. And once you've come to the personal choice, then there are other people around the table. You've brought on investors in your journey. You have a board. And you have what is probably the hardest conversation you will ever have with them, when you take all the things that you were talking about very calmly as risks and mitigating them and kind of weighing what the future of the company is like, and actually slightly changing the narrative and saying, well, this could be the outcome. Yes, we could be the $100 billion company, but maybe we won't be. And maybe this is what we could do. And these are the risks. And let's think about those risks. And let's think about the offer that we're looking at. That's not an easy conversation to have. It's almost unnatural, I would say, for an entrepreneur to have that kind of conversation with investors. So let's say you've engaged with your acquirer. You made your decision. You know this is something you want to try to do, and you're making progress. Part 3 is closing the deal. I have 3 words. Well, it's actually 4. Close the fucking deal. It is being in the middle of an acquisition process is the most dangerous part of your company's life. More often than not, as I think Julien said, maybe not, deals can fall apart. And when they fall apart, and when it's an acquisition, it is very, very dangerous for your company, because your attention, the founder's attention, is gone. You've been spending months with lawyers and accountants figuring out how to structure and make this deal happen. Your investors have already heard you just had a really hard conversation with them, and their minds are already elsewhere. They're already thinking about the next thing. It's very hard to go back from that point and just go back to life as usual. And it's even harder if, God forbid, the deal leaks and your employees are now saying, oh, let me just count my options and see what this is going to be for me. It's very, very destructive, and your productivity will simply tank. So keep the deal secret, for crying out loud. Do not tell anyone, and tell the lawyers and the accountants and the investors to shut their mouths and make the deal happen fast. And of course, you have to do all of this when you're still willing to walk away, because otherwise you can't negotiate. So it's ultimately this very, very tough kind of balance between everything. The other thing that's really interesting about an acquisition process, I think more than anything else, is that as an entrepreneur, as a founder, you are alone. So I think the only other time that you're really alone is your very first funding round, when it's you versus investors. Because in the second or third or whatever funding round, your existing investors and yourselves are 90% aligned, actually. And it's helpful to have, instead of have to deal with 5 or 4, 5, 6, depending on your company. We had 4 investors, different people with different opinions. It's nice to have someone that's actually on your side. In the acquisition, everyone is going to have their own opinions, their own agenda. They're going to pull stuff their own way because they have their own their own needs in terms of how their funds are structured or what they need or a billion different legal details. And basically as the founder, you got to get through that, and you got to make sure that everything is in line, falls into place, and you can move forward. The one thing that we did very well was we brought on a pro. So it's really important to have someone who has done this, who knows what he's doing, and is able to really get everyone aligned and on the same page. We brought Marty Corman from Wilson Sonsini, amazing lawyer. And just imagine the difference between the conversation. Let's say I call up my investors after a hard day of negotiating with Facebook, and I say, hey guys, so we won these issues and we lost these, what do you think? I'm a first-time CEO. Like, they would say, dude, like, you have no idea what you're doing. How could you possibly lose on those issues? On the other hand, Marty calls them up at the end of the day. He has this deep voice. Gentlemen, I've been doing this for 25 years, and this is a good deal. Here's what we lost, and here's what we won. Silence on the line. They say, Marty, good job. Great winning. Bring a pro. It is so important. And yes, close the fucking deal. That is the most important thing once you're in the process. That's it for me.
So it is possible, and there are examples out there of companies that have been very successful where they never took a single dollar of funding, and they never ever got bought, and they continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger. That is possible. But if you're one of the 99.99% of other companies who were successful, forget about all the failures and everything else, even on successful companies, if you're in the 99.99%, somewhere along the way, you're raising money and you want to position yourself and you're going to go through an M&A process. That's what the definition of success is at the end of the day. You have to have good products, you have to have a great team, you have to have a vision, but at the end of the day, you have to be able to execute on the deal similar to what Guy just went through. So the art of the deal is so important for you to make sure that you get right. And no one, I don't believe any of you, would start a company and grow it and say, I'm going to build this product, I'm going to build it in this way, and only a year later would you say, okay, now let me think about the customers I'm going to sell it to. You would never do that, right? We've been taught from the very beginning, you think about your customers, you think about how you're going to sell it, hopefully before you write the first line of code. The purpose of this presentation is to let you know that as you're thinking about all that, during that whole process, even before you form your team, you should be thinking about how are you going to raise money and how are you going to have your company be bought for a lot of money. Because never forget, that's really what's going to make you and your team successful at the end of the day, is your ability to do the art of the deal. And it's not something you think about when somebody comes up to you and says, hey, I'm interested in acquiring your company. You have to be thinking about it from the very, very beginning. I want to thank my panelists for sure. We do have time for some questions, though. So for Danny and Julien and Guy and myself, any questions you'd like to ask on the art of the deal?
This is a question for Guy. I thought it particularly interesting. You talked a bit about your experience with your M&A lawyers. I myself, I do some M&A. I'm a lawyer. And I found it interesting from the client's perspective to hear, what do you think are best practices in an M&A context in dealing with your lawyer? Because quite often, you know, we're asked for to give estimates. It's pretty much impossible to give an estimate for a deal. We're, you know, told we're expensive. Well, sorry. We do have to charge for our time, and we don't work on success fees like certain consultants do. So in terms of you as a client dealing with your lawyer, how do you go about managing that financial aspect of that relationship?
I think there are two kinds of lawyers, and you actually need both of them in a deal. There are the lawyers who have to go through the nitty-gritty 200-300 page documents. I have not read them, I admit, but I signed a lot of them. And there's a lot of detail that needs to be gone through. And then you need, though, like a quarterback. You need the head lawyer who is less in the details, but can do the negotiating, understands what's market, understand what is fair, what isn't. And typically, by the way, like a good lawyer will have also done a lot of deals with his counterpart who is representing the other side. They hang out. They've done this a million times. Once the lawyer was on the acquirer side, once it was on the target side. They know each other, and it just comes down to like their relationship. They can sort it out. The ones that are actually really important to keep an eye on are the junior level, like this army of lawyers that's that's below the covers. And this is particularly, I would say, well, obviously I will say that the lawyers on the other side are always being unfair and they're trying to pull dirty tricks and so forth, but probably on both sides. You need to keep them in line and make sure they don't waste your time. And this is actually something that I'd say we learned along the road in commercial deals when we were fundraising. Like, lawyers who don't see the big picture can waste your time. They will get into negotiating tiny, tiny, tiny little details that are pointless and will just waste your time. So you got to know when to kind of pull back and say, whoa, whoa, this is fine. Willing to take this risk, or let's give on this, or let's win this point, and let's move forward. Same thing happens on the acquirer side. We had, like, one story I remember is that we had a due diligence request for every piece of open source that was involved in anything. This is like a junior associate, of course. And I said, we have some developers working on Ubuntu. Do you want a list of all 2,000 packages there, or like, are you really going to use that? Eventually, when we went slightly up the chain, people realized that was a stupid request. But that kind of thing is really important, just to keep everyone in line there. You need to be reasonable, and you need to be able to have the high-level lawyer who can actually push forward and make sure the deal closes.
To what extent did you target specific people? I know you spoke about that on press, but on the fundraising side as well. Just curious as how you either targeted your acquirer, targeted your funder.
Sure.
What process did you go
Do you
through?
want to know more about acquirers or funders?
I just want to know the process that any of you have taken to
Yeah.
target the people that are putting money into your business.
Okay.
Or
Right. So
press.
you make a list so gigantic that you're scared to actually meet that many people. I'm not exaggerating. I think, on the first round that I met people at probably, 10, 20 firms or something. And for our Series A, which we just recently did, I had a list of over 100 firms. And I didn't talk to all of them, but I definitely had an intro to at least one partner at every single firm. Because deals fall through, and no amount of convincing is going to convince them to do a deal, right? Like we were just saying, deals are constantly falling through. People like it, then they don't, and then they like it, and they don't. And the best thing that you can do is create momentum through other parts of the deal happening. So, so the question is, how do you get that list? You're just going to go after it, and you're going to go after it through public methods. It's pretty easy. There's 1 million VC funds or 1 million possible acquirers based on what your technology is. Could be 20, 30 different acquirers. So just get as close as you can to the top. Another thing to do is to find a partner that's younger and that's excited to do a deal and who hasn't done a lot of deals. So be more enthusiastic about doing it than the super rich older partner who's always sitting on a boat, right? Who doesn't really care.
Just one thing I just wanted to add there is Julian's absolutely right. Is I've raised money close to 20 times, and I've done 9 different acquisitions, and every single time that usually the person ends up funding me or acquiring is not who I thought it was going to be. I pick the people I think are the obvious ones. I go for them first. Then there's a few others I'm like, hey, why not? Most of the time, it's the hey, why nots that end up at the ones that are doing it. So obviously, you want to work with VCs or investors that you know, or you have a personal connection or whatever. But you'd be surprised how many times you either get great funding or you do an M&A deal with somebody that you just would never expect. So make the list be big and just put time and effort into it.
Hello? Can you ever get too many intros to one fund? So don't go multiple intros, multiple people at the fund, go in once to one person.
Yeah.
Partner, analyst, stuff, in the process.
Yeah, for the people in the back of the room, the question was, do you go into multiple people at a fund? And Julien, I agree with Julien completely. You only do one because in any of these VC firms, there's a lot of competition, a lot of politics. If you go to one and there's some interest, and then you go to another, they'll both drop you like a hot rock. So you want to think about who that first one is you go in with, because you're probably going to be with that person and only that person, whether it's good or bad.
Can I add something there to this, Randy? The best intro you can get to any fund is from entrepreneur in which that fund has invested in, right? So if you want to get to real ventures, if you want to get to real ventures, for example, you can talk to Julien. That's the best intro you can get.
So I had a question based on, when you start a company, you're supposed to be on that driven or that mission to go IPO. But then on the other hand, should the mission be that you want to get sold or acquired, bought or acquired? But is there like one path that you think is stronger than the other? Because I think if you were focused on being acquired, you could lose focus rather than keeping independent. I'm just curious on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, the rule of thumb here, and it's CEO has a very tough job, and everybody on the management team does, but you really want to do two things in parallel. Is you absolutely want to run your business every day, day in and out, assuming you're going to be the biggest, most successful company, and you're going to have this great IPO on Wall Street. That's how you want to wake up each day and move forward. But at the same time, in parallel, you just always want to keep your mind open and look for those opportunities that may come in front of you, either through a strategic partnership or something else you put in place. And then when you do feel like the time is right to maybe go off of the IPO path, at least you're then ready. So one criticism, for example, when people like myself give talks on it's important to always be prepared to be funded, prepared to be acquired, they're like, well, that's just distracting. You need to put all of your time and effort on growing your product, building your team, understanding the marketplace. And the reality is, of course you need to do that. We're not saying you don't do that. But the reality is if you look at any of the statistics, if you're a successful company, which again is much smaller than all the companies that start out, if you are successful, there's a 94% chance that it's because someone acquired your company. Only 6% of successful companies go for an IPO. Now, should you try to swing for the fence at all times? You should. But as all of you know math, you should never go in any business proposition assuming you're going to be that 6% and completely ignore the 94%. So definitely do not let yourself be distracted. You shouldn't be running after acquirers every single day, but you should just build your company to be attractive. There's no reason you can't build your company to be attractive at the exact same time you're building great customers and you're building a great marketplace. You can do both things. Like in the case of Guy, and then when that opportunity happens where the investors and the team go, hey, this opportunity with Facebook is good, at least you've built your company in a way that it can survive the acquisition process without any problem. Because Guy can tell you offline, it's really, really hard. And if you saw the slide I put up, it's easy to get people attracted, but it's hard to actually bring that fish in using a fishing analogy. It's easy to get the hook and the fish, but actually getting it on board, landing the deal, having the money transfer is a ton of work. And if you don't think about M&A early on, you're going to make mistakes. So it's a great question, but the answer is you can do both in parallel if you're smart, just like you can have a quality product and still get to market quickly.
I have a question. Yeah, sorry, it just touches a little bit on what you just said as well. If you have a successful company and you feel that you should be part of that 94% that is bought, how do you go about courting companies? I assume you don't just call them and say, hey, do you want to buy me? Because I guess that's a sign of weakness. So do you just casually talk to them about partnerships and whatnot and then expect that they'll have the thought in the back of their head about acquiring you? Like, how does that part of the deal happen? How do they find you? How do you become acquainted with them?
Yeah, I'll give a quick answer and I'll pass it off to Guy. The reality is this is why you should be kind of thinking about it all the way through, because as you form strategic partnerships, just like Guy said, every time somebody at Facebook has a meeting with a small company, in the back of their mind they're thinking about M&A. You should be doing the same thing. Should it be the primary thing you're doing with that strategic partner? No, but it should be in the back of your mind, because as your company evolves, it'll go through different points where M&A could make more sense than at other points, and you always want to be ready for those opportunities. So it's the way you form strategic partnerships, it's what markets you go after, and making sure you know who the other players are. But Guy, how did you do it in your case?
I would say a few things. I'd say, first of all, don't go to the corp dev guys. Any deal coming in through corp dev is almost by definition, it must be a fire sale, it's an investor who's desperate to sell. Automatically that gets deducted by at least 50% in terms of the value that you're even thinking about. The most important and useful thing you can do is to get in front of the product and business guys. Like Randy said, just talk to them about your product, what you're doing. We think let's work together. Let's find a way to work together. And if you guide it in the right place, or sometimes they will guide it to the right place, they'll find, damn it, there's no way to build a partnership with this company. The only way to make it work is to actually have them be part of the family. That's the outcome you want to reach. But it's much more powerful when the product guys send an email to corp dev and say, hey, we'd like to look at this company, please.
We have time for one last question up here in the front.
Okay, so how do you tackle the geographical problem? So whether you're located in Israel and you're pitching California, or Montreal and you're pitching California, or elsewhere, how do you deal with that? Do you have to physically relocate before you go after investors?
Everyone can answer. I'm probably Israel's Israel's more connected despite being more remote. So I'm probably maybe the most remote. I'm lucky. I have a certain part of my team here that really just let me not have to worry about anything else. So that what I'm talking about being a deal, being highly socialized, it's like they have to hear about you like a year ago for something to be really possible. And the other way that you do that is by being at every meetup all the time, and then you see them all the time. Might not take a year then, but you have to have met them much before. And so I would definitely say that one of the big jobs of a CEO is to know everybody already and just find ways to get in the door. Your job is to network yourself into every firm that you can, possibly, just so you tell them how you're doing or something like that. That would be the way that I would do it. It's a challenge.
I would just add, move. That simple. We were in Israel about a year before the acquisition. I moved out to set up our office in Palo Alto. It's a very, in the Israeli ecosystem, despite being extremely well connected to the Valley, it is a standard move about 1 or 2 or 3 years in the company's life for the CEO to just get up and move. And frankly, the investors kick you in the ass if you don't do it.
Well, thank you, everybody, for your time. It was a great session. I want to thank in particular Danny, Guy, and Julien. Remember, the art of the deal. While you're doing everything else, master the art of the deal. And it can be done here in Montreal, no doubt about it.